you get a little bit of seepage, and then you have a little tumor that is slowly going lower and lower and lower to the point it hits your brachialis over the course of a week. Again, how are you going to explain that to your gym bros? Vigorous Steve here. Let's compare subcutaneous administrations versus intramuscular administrations in the context of oil-based anabolic androgenic steroids, which generally speaking form the foundation of most steroid cycles. And sometimes that's for bodybuilding goals or fitness goals or medically prescribed testosterone replacement therapy. I want to compare both administration techniques and keep everything into consideration. The injection depot, the amount of volume that this injection depot can hold, the maximum amount of volume that you can inject through both administration routes, how it affects the half-life and the active life of the active pharmaceutical ingredient, and how the injection depot looks cosmetically, and whether this injection depot, whether that's subcutaneous or intramuscular, will affect range of motion, which is one of the reasons why I want to make this comparison. Because what I noticed personally after many years of intramuscular glute administrations and ventriglute administrations is that my range of motion and mobility of my lower body starts to get affected negatively. Before we get into all of that, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And please, guys, do me a huge favor. If you're subscribed or you're considering about subscribing, please hit that notification bell button. If you're already hit that in the past, please unhit and re-hit the notification bell button so we all know that you're going to get notified when I release a new video, so I can fuel the algorithm and get picked up so we can get a little bit more views in the process. Much appreciated. Thank you guys so much. I'm trying my best to grow this YouTube channel, so a little bit of effort on my side and your side. Hit the notification bell button so we can fuel the algorithm sweetly. All right, let's get into the finer details of this comparison video. Now, subcutaneous administrations have been around for years, but the problem is that most of the medical literature has been determined on intramuscular administrations. So I'll link a couple of the studies of anabolic androgenic steroids regarding its active life and the rate at which intramuscular administrations leave the depot. I'll link all of those studies down below so you can do your own research after watching this video. But unfortunately for us, as of now, there's not a lot of clinical evidence regarding subcutaneous administrations of oil-based anabolic androgenic steroids and how they might affect the pharmacodynamics of the active pharmaceutical ingredient compared to intramuscular administration. So, for the sake of this video, we're mostly going to go with anecdotal experience from myself, many of my clients, and talking to various bodybuilders over the last 20 years. The injection depot that subcutaneous administrations can hold, I would limit it to 0.5 milliliter per time. But it also depends on the carrier oil in which the anabolic androgenic steroids are suspended. So if you do an administration in MCT oil, you might be able to get away with a slightly larger injection volume, let's say up to 1 milliliter per administration site when that's done subcutaneously, because MCT oil disperses quite easily. The oil is very thin, medium-chain triglycerides are broken down by lipases much more readily, so a 1 milliliter MCT administration might break down much faster compared to a 0.5 milliliter administration of something like castor oil, which has a very high dynamic viscosity rating. It's a much thicker, much more viscous oil compared to MCT oil, and grapeseed oil, sesame oil, or cottonseed oil fall pretty much somewhere in the middle. So maybe you can get away with up to 0.75 milliliters of these three carrier oils. But when it comes to castor oil, my favorite carrier oil being used by Rotex Medica or Bayer in their testovirins and primobolan products, I would limit it to 0.5 milliliters per injection depot because it takes a much longer time for these carrier oils to disperse and might even leave a fat droplet for up to a week at the site of administration. This is one of the reasons why I was always very hesitant of doing subcutaneous administrations, because in the past, I would say I would do an injection depot of 2 milliliters intramuscularly, and when you get very, very lean, or you're in a little bit higher dose of anabolic androgenic steroids, and your muscles are quite tight, especially if you repeatedly inject in the upper glutes, you might get seepage. So you would inject 2 milliliters in the left glute, for example, and then part of the injection volume would seep from the injection depot, leaving a little oil droplet in the subcutaneous space, which might take up to 7 days to disperse and metabolize and not be noticeable cosmetically. Again, you would have a little bump, especially when you're leaner, which is very noticeable. And even with some vigorous massaging on that little area, it would still take a while for that fat droplet to be metabolized and absorbed into the body. So this is one of the reasons why I was always against subcutaneous administrations, because it doesn't look very cosmetically appealing, especially if that happens in the shoulder, for example. You do an intramuscular administration in the delt, you get a little bit of seepage, and then you have a little tumor that is slowly going lower and lower and lower to the point it hits your brachialis over the course of a week. Again, how are you going to explain that to your gym bros? But now that I've done glute administrations for over a decade, again, the mobility is getting a little bit less, and now the pain is radiating to my knees, so I'm trying to avoid that going forward. Now, with intramuscular administrations, depending on the body part, some body parts can hold 1 milliliter of an injection depot, some can even hold 3 milliliters. The glutes, for example. I know guys that do 5 milliliter oil-based administrations, but beyond 3 milliliters, again, there might be a little bit of a lump and a bump, depending on the site of administration, so I would generally avoid that. But when you compare both administration routes, intramuscular can certainly hold a much higher injection volume, especially if you use a 1.5-inch needle. Now, unfortunately for us, many of the issues that we face in bodybuilding regarding very, very tight muscles radiating to our knees and elbows is caused by deep intramuscular administrations, because it's this 1.5-inch needle and high injection volume that makes the muscle tight and produces scar tissue. Now, you can work through the scar tissue with deep tissue massage therapy or Graston technique or using a lacrosse ball or a sturdy foam roller. Over time, repetitive intramuscular administrations produce a lot of scar tissue, which you need to resolve with therapy. But this issue doesn't occur with subcutaneous administrations. So in this sense, even though subcutaneous administrations can't hold a very high injection volume, this way there isn't any impairing scar tissue buildup or calcification of skeletal muscle, limiting your range of motion and impairing your mobility. The downsides, or benefits, depending on how you look at it, subcutaneous administrations result in a different serum concentrations over time compared to intramuscular administrations. Because if you put the injection depot deep within the skeletal muscle, you see that serum concentrations of testosterone or other anabolic androgenic steroids rise quite rapidly. Now, unfortunately, this information is currently unknown for subcutaneous administrations of oil-based anabolic androgenic steroids, because generally speaking, the medical community only does intramuscular administrations, so that's where the data is stemming from. You see that regardless of ester, an oil-based steroid administration peaks serum concentrations within the first 2 days. I already explained this in a previous video. I'll link it at the end of this one. What is the best time to inject your steroids? That was purely based on intramuscular administration, because that's where most of the clinical evidence is available on. But when you do a subcutaneous administration, where a lot of popularity has arisen in the TRT and HRT community, is because it leaves the injection depot a lot slower, is that serum concentrations are a lot more stable. So let's say you do the same injection depot of 0.5 milliliters of a testosterone enanthate formula with subcutaneous administrations. The serum concentrations come up a little bit slower, but are also more stable compared to an intramuscular administration of the same injection depot. There you see some peaks and valleys. And in these peaks and valleys is where a lot of aromatization and 5-alpha reductase activity occurs. So a lot of guys that don't want to use an aromatase inhibitor or suffer from hair loss, they would prefer subcutaneous administrations of their testosterone replacement therapy or their hormone replacement therapy to keep serum concentrations more stable. The peaks might not be as high as an intramuscular administration, but serum estradiol and serum dihydrotestosterone is now much more favorable, much more easy to manage, and perhaps doesn't require the use of an aromatase inhibitor or a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, because again, there's not so much conversion because the peaks and valleys are closer together. There's a more narrow band of serum concentrations, limiting the use of other ancillaries and keeping the side effects at bay. Now, if you want to do this for a steroid cycle, it should still be possible. Ideally, you limit the injection volume of a subcutaneous administration to 0.5 milliliters per administration site, because it doesn't look so cosmetically appealing. Basically, the only place you can do that is in the upper glutes. Because if the oil droplets remain at the injection depot for up to a week or maybe even longer, again, it highly depends on the carrier oil and the ultimate injection volume of what you're willing to administer. If it remains there for a week and you're doing daily administrations of 0.5 milliliter or maybe even more, it's the same area that most people would do their intramuscular administrations, because that is the least noticeable place of doing a steroid administration, unless you're doing a side chest pose, for example. And I think for 99% of us that do repetitive glute shots, it's very, very noticeable because there's an extra glute on top of your glutes and you only have feathering and separation on the bottom portion of the glutes. And on the top, there's a little bit of a bulbous protrusion due to the repetitive administrations at the site and scar tissue buildup. Now, the second spot of doing intramuscular administrations would be the lats. Still, if you get very, very lean and you get seepage there, you might still get a subcutaneous oil bubble that takes a little bit longer to disperse. But what I will do, keeping my knee pain and all this tightness in the ventroglute, the hips, the upper glute into consideration, the next time I go on cycle, I will do daily administrations up to 0.5 milliliters subcutaneous. And if I am going to end up at 1 milliliter per day, because my cycle is a little bit higher in milligrams, I would have to do 2 administration sites. Now again, I will limit it to castor oil because I do like my pharmaceutical grade products. I will do that for a month, and then of course I will report my findings with an update video. It might still take a couple months to drop because again, right now I'm off cycle, just doing ACG monotherapy. So expect an update video to drop somewhere in July or maybe even August if I start my next cycle a little bit later. So I would like to know from you guys until that video drops. I know a lot of you guys are doing subcutaneous administrations. What are your experiences? What is the maximum injection volume that your subcutaneous space can hold? Have you done a full-blown steroid cycle of multiple milliliters per week, doing exclusively subcutaneous administrations? Let's get a discussion going. Until the next video drops, thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the YouTube description section. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at VigorSteve. Have a look at my website, a lot of free articles for your reading pleasure. If you have a question, in many, many cases, I already wrote an article about it. So head over to VigorSteve.com, go to the articles section, type in your keywords, and I'm pretty sure there's an article explaining every final little detail. So you can find a solution to your questions with an article that's way more in depth to what you thought was even possible. A front double bicep for the Vigorous crew. You guys know what to do. Much love, much appreciation. I'll see you guys in the next video.